Here we go.
Okay. So I guess I will screen share. Yeah, since it's a small group, if Lydia, if you want to take something in a different direction, feel free to. Let me get out of my emails so it's not bothering us. And all right, you can see like the full PowerPoint? Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me, Siobhan. I'm excited to talk about a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. Been studying work-life issues for I think 15 years now. I actually started grad school, decided to become an industrial organizational psychologist because of work-life issues. We talked about it in one of my classes, and I was like, somebody made a very um, gendered comment about how men could never do things at home and how, like there's these gender roles. And I was like, wait, what? People still think that way? So um, it kind of got me interested. And really, I've been studying it ever since I started graduate school. So I was going to start just kind of talking about like the term work family balance because I think it's sort of a loaded term and a lot of people interpret it differently. Um, hi. So I was just going to kind of open it up like to the audience in terms of if you feel comfortable chiming in, you can unmute and say or put in the chat. But like, what when you hear that term, what does it mean to you?
That I don't tuck and roll out of my car because I've just completely failed at that particular day. No, technically, I mean, I think to me, work family balance is trying to achieve what I personally would consider about the right amount of time spent with my family and the right amount of time spent on work. And that may be different for me than it is for somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Lydia, you have anything you want to chime in? I won't force you.
Um, I think it's like finding like an equilibrium where the demands and even I guess joys of both of those realms are I don't know, like somewhat equal.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just I would say I don't know. I don't know what it means. I don't know how to balance, but I think something about an equilibrium makes sense
Sure.
to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll kind of show you when you Google it, the different images you see, and then talk about the definition that at least is used, kind of the commonly accepted definition in academia these days. So I think these images represent a lot of the different ideas out there. Like this first one in the middle just makes me laugh. Like she's perfectly poised, like holding the baby with one hand and high heels, right? Balancing all that stuff and on a tightrope, making it look easy. And then I think this top one is kind of the idea that the initial balance, like analogy invokes, which is like, I've got work here, I've got family here, and I'm trying to keep them relatively even. Just sort of what you both alluded to. Um, the woman over here, right? She's actually in the moment showing this balance because she's breastfeeding a baby on a work call and trying to clean. So she's doing it all, but she looks frazzled. And then the yin and the yang, which is representing this like harmony that work and family are just fitting together perfectly. So a lot of different ideas out there, which has created some issues in studying balance because so many people use different definitions. So it's hard to summarize the research because of that. But a sort of recent paper, which was co-authored by actually my mentor from the University of South Florida, Tammy Allen, tries to take a broader view of this and saying that it's the extent that a person's effectiveness and satisfaction, so it's getting at the performance aspect as well as how you're enjoying a given role, being compatible with your life priorities at a given point in time. So that gets at that notion of like it's going to change and it's what feels balanced for you. So I think that's important to keep in mind that it's, and that's another challenge in studying it. It is a little bit of an idiosyncratic thing to different people and also changes across a person, across their lifespan. And we'll kind of come back to some of those ideas in a little bit. The academic research actually focuses a lot more on the concept of conflict. I don't know if it's because we have this negative spin on things initially. And it's a little bit different than balance. It's not exactly like the opposite of balance, although it does tend to correlate kind of in the opposite way of different things. But it's thought to go in two directions. So you can have work interfering with family and family interfering with work. And then you also have different types of conflict. So the first one is time-based. I think that's what most people think of initially when they think of like work and family conflicting, which is like, I have to work late, I'm missing family dinner. I have a sick kid, I'm trying to figure out how to get my class covered, right? So that's just the two directions there. Strain-based gets more at like the stressors and the strain reactions to those from one domain impact the other. So I like to think about this from a rumination standpoint. Like if something bad happens at work and you just kind of like can't let it go, you know, you're like thinking about it all night, you're not present with your kids. Behavior based is a little bit more rare and I think only occurs in certain jobs, but it's when a job requires you to act a certain way but that's not really compatible with how you have to act at home. Like if you were a prison guard or something, you had to be really stern and then you came home and your family's like, why are you yelling at me? And then the fourth one, which isn't always included, but I like this one, is energy based because I just think it's so important. It's like you're just so exhausted from one domain, you know, that you can't focus in the other. I can really relate to this. Kids waking up 5 times last night. We're getting there. So a lot of the research I'm going to talk about, I'm talking about it as balance, but I think some of it draws from actually this conflict perspective too. So here's the framework I'm going to use and kind of go through each of these 6 buckets, which I think are kind of overarching themes that we know from the research about what contributes to the sense of balance. So we'll start with the self-awareness and reflection. So I think the first step is taking stock of kind of where you stand in your life currently compared to where you would like things to stand. And I have a little spreadsheet that I made that I can send around. I tried to put it earlier when we were first starting in the chat, but it wouldn't let me upload for some reason. So I'm happy to share it. But basically, it's just like a way to kind of identify gaps. And so I'll walk you through this. So the first thing is figuring out what your main life roles are that are important to you. And so like, I think it's easy to do by like list your family roles, list your work roles, and list your other. So like this is one that I put together for myself. And it doesn't have to be every single role, but again, the ones that are most important. And then we can think about our life roles as this pie. And so different pieces of the pie are taken up by these different life roles. But it's the proportion of the pie that we want to start paying attention to. So the spreadsheet that I have, what it does is it looks kind of like this. And you enter all your life roles. And then you think about what percentage of my pie is currently going here. What percentage of my pie should ideally go here? And then it will calculate the discrepancy for you. So I'll show you the truth in mine here. And the positive number means that you're doing more than you want. So the actual, or sorry, that's backwards. Right? The positive would mean I'm doing less than I want. Sorry. So the negative would indicate that you're doing more than you want. So you can see like I put mother, that I clearly like 30% of my time feels devoted to that, but I'd really like it to be 25, which, you know, might feel like a weird thing to admit, but that's the truth, right? When you have a newborn, there's a lot of focus on that and it feels like more than I want. So you can go through and do that with all of them, and the spreadsheet will make it so the allocation has to be 100. And then you can take a pause and sort of take stock of this. You know, 0 would be you're just where you should be. And see, you know, where am I doing less than I want? Where am I doing more than I want? And I think this is, I have this rocket here because thinking about this is a launching pad for, okay, so now I know why I might, if I'm feeling imbalanced, you can look kind of to these places as where to start in terms of thinking about the tweaking. And so, again, I think this is really just a first step in kind of seeing, like diagnosing where the issue might be lying. Then the next bucket is supportive relationships. And we can think about this in a 2x2 matrix. You can have support from people at work and people at home. And I'm using family, but broadly we could say anyone, you know, non-work. And then you can have instrumental support, which is really tangible resources that help you actually deal with work family stressors. Or you can have emotional support, which is more like intangibles that help you kind of cope with it, deal with the negative reactions. So, like just somebody letting you vent, offering validation, encouragement, that kind of thing. So, from the work instrumental support side, here's the various things that research has tended to focus on. The first one is flexible policies that the workplace offers. And we all now know remote work quite well. But that pre-pandemic, was talked about a lot sort of as a solution, allowing flexibility in the location of work. I think we got thrown into it during a pandemic when kids weren't in school, and it was a little bit of a different experience. I have a star there though, because I don't want to overstate this as a benefit, because I think sort of something like Obama had a flexibility forum in the White House and was like, this is the solution. The data show it does help, but maybe not as much as people are thinking. I don't think that's like a patch. You can't just do that and nothing else. It does help, but in some cases it can make people have actually more conflict because you're working from home. Now you have the family demands that are right there. People are asking you to do more. The kids are interrupting you more. So again, not a perfect solution. Part-time work and flexible career paths. We don't have very many part-time jobs in the US in general, but in other countries, they make much more use of that as a way to when your kids are young, you want to scale back a little bit at work. And then flexible career paths is the same thing. They do this at Deloitte, I know, where they have this recognition that you have different things going on in your life at different times and allow you to kind of scale back in different ways and sort of help you with that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Dependent care supports are subsidizing childcare, providing emergency childcare. So that's like if a kid is sick and you can't find a sitter last minute, the organization will have some kind of company that will help you with that. And then, on-site childcare. And sometimes the on-site childcare is just there for convenience and the company doesn't subsidize it, but sometimes they subsidize that as well. And then parental leave policies. US has FMLA, which is guarantees 12 weeks of unpaid leave. But other than that, there's very little. So it's really organization specific if there is paid offerings. I don't know if people are aware, but I think it was last summer, the governor passed a 3-week paid leave for state employees. So finally we have something. I wanted to throw out here, I feel like I've navigated the UGA HR system with leave pretty well. And I don't think it's that easy to understand the different ways, things that you can do to actually get leave here. So if anybody wants to follow up with me, I'm happy to talk about that. Family supportive supervisors. So supervisors play a really big role in this, your immediate supervisor, and they can do things like helping you creative work family management, which means just thinking outside the box to come up with idiosyncratic solutions for individual people. And then helping with actual task and scheduling support. So sometimes if you can't get to something, picking that up for you, or if you can't work a certain schedule because of family demands, being understanding of that in scheduling processes. And then the last one's a work family culture, which you can't really control as a individual, but I guess you can think about this, when you're looking at jobs, but it's just sort of the extent to which the organization as a whole supports work and family management. And the 3 dimensions of this are how much they demand people to be like work long hours, how much they reward or punish people for using work family supports in terms of career implications, and then how much management is buying into the whole idea. And then last, of course, coworkers can also help with task support and schedule swapping. So a lot of different stuff can come from the work side. The family side, you can have the support come from your spouse or partner, your kids, your parents, your friends, or even paid help. Most of the support tends to be that research focuses on is from the spouse. I'm going to talk most about that. And this is where the good old division of labor comes into play. So here's some fun statistics. They're a little bit dated now, but this was the most comprehensive I could find. So this is showing you, this is from the American Time Use Survey, which surveys a nationally representative sample of people for one day, but gets very detailed information what they're doing that full day. So we can see the average, and it has primary and secondary activities, and that means primary care for children is all you're doing is watching the kids. Secondary is like you're making dinner, but you're also watching the kids. So on average, men do about 5 hours, and women are doing just under 6 hours every day. So you see that gap in childcare emerges. When we look at housework and food prep, Also a gap there with women doing about 45 minutes more. And then when we look at work hours, we see the trend in the opposite direction. So if you look at just fathers with young kids, they're doing about 9 hours, where mothers are doing 7.67. But if you break this down by part-time and full-time workers, because this is skewed because there's many more women that work part-time than men, you can see actually men, just full-time men are working even more. Women, full-time mothers are still at 8.24 hours. So there's a gap such that men are doing more here. And this trend, if you look at fathers compared to all male workers, it's pretty similar. Whereas mothers scale back, dads tend to, once they become dads, actually work longer hours. So this can be frustrating when you don't have an equal division of labor at home. And things have gotten worse during COVID. So this is just showing the amount of people, this was July 2020, who were not working because of childcare, broken down by age group. And you can see huge chunk of women aged 25 to 44 were not, very disproportionate to men. So I don't think this is news for anyone. We do have, the tendency is for labor in the US to be unequally divided. And there's implications for this in terms of decreased marital quality, more psychological stress, worse physical health outcomes, particularly for the person who is doing more of the labor. But all this does depend heavily on your perceptions of fairness. So actually, even if it's not equal, if you think it's fair, it basically buffers against these negative responses. And research has found that the average woman thinks if her husband's doing 36%, then that's fair. So it's not actually 50-50. And that could be because women, are just realistic and not expecting that, or they're, rather than comparing within their household, they're looking at other couples and they're saying, well, he does more than so-and-so's husband. So this outward comparison. So just a sort of interesting thing to consider there. So how do you actually achieve a more equitable division of labor to get more support at home? This is one of those things where it's frustrating that there's not more research on tangible advice for how to do this. So I wouldn't say this is a large body of research, but these are a few ideas that come from it. There's the idea of doing I changed it to stuff I do, but it has a 4-letter word name list that each person creates, and they put everything that they're doing. And this is not in an effort to be like, look what I'm doing so much more than you, but just so that each partner can understand everything that the other person's doing. Because sometimes we don't see it and we don't know how much work it is. And I think what's important here is to include what's called mental labor. So that's the things that aren't seen, which is like remembering, when they have to bring a snack to school or show and tell to school, remembering the birthday parties, when they need to get new clothes, all that stuff that has to happen in the background to keep things going is part of this. Having just an open dialogue if you feel like there's tasks that you would like to share more. A lot of people just don't actually feel comfortable communicating with their partner about this because I think it can become a contentious issue. But that certainly does help. And then figuring out a strategy. There is no this is the best strategy according to the research. But you can do it. Each person takes different tasks. And I always take out the trash, for instance, would be, that's how we divide. Or you could alternate by days. Or you could just have no clear assignment. But that requires, I think, more check-ins to make sure people feel like things are fair. And then if you can afford it, outsourcing is certainly the way to go, particularly thinking about the tasks that they don't give you any meaning, in your roles. Some people like to cook because they feel like it brings them meaning in terms of I like doing that. I like feeling like I'm feeding my family. But if there are things that don't give you that and you can outsource them and you can afford it, do it. I will say anecdotally, we just started paying for 3 hours a week of help. And we have someone come and she folds off my laundry and puts it all away and chops the vegetables and gets the click list and picks up the toys. And those 3 hours are amazing and worth it. And I put an ad up and I had 20 responses from college kids. So if anybody wants to copy me, highly recommend this. It's just 3 hours, but that's 3 hours of your week that you don't have to spend doing that. And I'm not annoyed because I don't see laundry just piled up for all week. The last thing is be mindful of gatekeeping. So I hesitate a little bit to talk about this because it sort of feels like blaming the victim, but there is some research that particularly women, sometimes men don't engage in labor because they feel like women are saying, well, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it my way. And they're actually critical of them. And so it's called gatekeeping because women are keeping it under their purview. They won't allow men to do it. I think this gets overstated as a reason, but it's something to think about. If somebody doesn't do something exactly how you would, it's probably still okay. And then last, about emotional support. The supervisor, again, is most important here. There's a lot of research on supervisor support. In particular, supportive behaviors are just making your employees feel like they can talk to you about their work and family concerns, actually checking in on them. That's one thing we found during the pandemic research we did, was people said, I just want my supervisor to check in and ask if I'm okay. And I think that carries over also to work family issues. And then just increasing face-to-face contact so you can have that, feel like you have a personal relationship. If you're interested in this more, Leslie Hammer and Ellen Kosick have done a lot of work on this, and I put the website there. They have a whole training program about how to make supervisors more supportive, and they've shown that it actually works. And then the last would be, I've heard of this particularly in conversations I was having with GitHub. They were saying they have these affinity groups within their company, and they have one for parents. And so it's an opportunity to meet people that are like you, maybe in the same life stage, that you can, discuss strategy, just talk about things, just another form of support. And then I think on the family side, I'm not going to talk a ton about this, but just allowing some space for venting, to listen to your partner, to have a team mentality in terms of, if they're saying, I feel like I'm struggling because of all this, don't take it to mean that they're saying you're not doing enough. Allowing people to talk and remembering you are working together to a common goal. And then last, there's research that shows that gratitude goes a long way. So just expressing that you see your partner's help that they're giving and you're thankful for it, is quite powerful. So then that brings us to boundary management. This is another topic that's really blown up during the pandemic, because boundaries really got blurred, of course. People home all the time and working from home. So I had a little activity. I don't know if we feel like doing it, but I guess if you want to raise your hand, or you could press the icon if you've been asked to meet or speak about a work issue while participating in a family activity. Yes. Been asked to do more work than you agreed to on a project so that it impacts planned family time. Oh, yes. Asked to participate in a family activity that will interfere with your commitments at work. Does sick kids at home count as asked? I don't know. And then experienced a family emergency that's impacted your ability. So what I'm just showing here is, our boundaries are often permeated between work and family. And it's kind of a constant juggle here. So we can think about this idea of boundary management as existing on a continuum of integration to segmentation. And so what I mean generally by boundary management is people differ in how they like to keep their boundary around work and their boundary around family. Some people are integrators, meaning like work and family are one and the same for them. They can go from personal emails to work emails to calls, and they're just all day going back and forth, and it's not a problem. These people probably didn't have any trouble working from home. Other end of the continuum is segmentation. These are like people who really don't like to think about work while at home, and vice versa. I mean, they're keeping things separate. They struggled when they were working from home because they did not have that separation. And so we think about boundaries both physically, temporally. You can think about them in a lot of different ways. And it's a continuum, so most people probably fall somewhere in the middle of this. And in that Excel sheet that I said I would pass around, there's also a boundary management assessment that I put in there that you can fill out, and it'll kind of tell you where you fall on this if you're interested. So here's some quotes from some research that some colleagues did during the pandemic that really speaks to boundary management and the challenges with it. So the first one's talking about not having a closed office at home because there's only one office, and the husband got that. And so when you're working from the kitchen table, it's like everything's just distracting you constantly. And then another one's talking about the switching, the task switching back and forth versus the physical location, but having to go in and out of work and family, and just feeling like those boundaries are gone. And then this bottom one, I think this one's interesting, of saying this person was doing all of the childcare, so saying there's no boundaries, and the husband thinks that, well, now you're home all day, so you can just do all these menial tasks. So he sees her time as an advantage to him, and it's the literal worst. Again, I think this has been an issue pre-pandemic, but that, of course, heightened it. So there are some tactics you can do to help better manage boundaries. And a lot of this gets at, if you're an integrator, you probably don't need to do much of this because you're okay. But most of us, I think, fall, not totally on the integration side. So this can help with more of the segmentation. The first one is leveraging technology. So that's in the behavioral bucket. So this is, you can use your phone to put it on focus mode so you don't get disturbed during the day. I think that's sometimes a little bit harder when you have young kids because you do need to get some notifications. You can also, turn off after notifications from work after hours on your phone. Another thing that I've heard a lot of discussion about and had a lot of media people ask me about this is the fake commute. And so that's a way to behaviorally because if you're working from home and you used to have a commute, that was like a time when you would signal to your brain, like, okay, I'm transitioning between work and family, but we don't have that anymore. So people are like walking around the block to kind of as a way to emulate that, which I think is an interesting idea. Some people are actually getting in their car and driving around. I don't know if it's take it that far, but sort of to trick your brain. And actually the commute time, some research says, is an important time because it's really the only me time a lot of people get. So trying to get a little bit of that back. The temporal one is controlling your work time. So if you have set start and stop times, that helps preserve boundaries. And then purposefully disconnecting. So if you have a separate office, which is the ideal situation, closing that door after work hours so you're not tempted, closing down your laptop so that you're signaling that part work is closed for the day. The physical, adapting physical boundaries, that's what I said about the work office with the door is the ideal for that. I know it's not possible for everybody. And then managing physical artifacts gets it, things like some people have a separate phone for work and home. Some people have a separate set of keys. So if you're really a segmenter, that might help. And then finally, the communicative is setting expectations with people in your work and family life about what your boundaries are. If you don't tell people, they don't know. And then if they do violate those expectations, kind of calling them out on it. It's a little bit harder with your work people, but I think if you can make it clear, like in order for my work family balance, I can't answer emails after 6. I promise I'll answer them the next day. I think just stating it can go a long way. Then coping strategies. So talk about 2 studies here. This one was done, it says couple level strategies, but actually this was at the individual level. I meant to change that. So they did interviews with couples, but again, it's individual level strategies to see what people were actually doing to better manage work and family. And here's what they came up with. So they have these 4 strategies that can be done at home or at work. So the super at home is people who insist, I have to do all the family stuff by myself and I have to do it perfectly. I like this quote. I have to be perfect in all things, so I get up at 4 a.m. to bake bread. All right. Good enough is like, I'm going to lower my standards of performance at home and be okay with it. So I can't do everything perfectly, so I'm going to just suffice on some of it. Delegation is just like it sounds, having others help you at home. And then priorities are realizing you can't do it all, so prioritizing what's most important and focusing on that. And so the quotes I have here are from the family side, but you could also do all of the same stuff. They found that people also do all of this in the work domain as well. Which kind of begs the question, so which one is the best for balance? Well, it actually really depends on your sex and your gender role ideology, which one is the best. So by gender role ideology, I mean people vary on the spectrum how traditional they are, meaning that they think men and women should occupy these separate roles, or if they're more egalitarian, where they don't think that gender dictates your behaviors. And so for traditional women, they felt the most sense of balance when they were doing the good enough at work, delegation at work, or priorities at work. So you can see that kind of makes sense because this is the stuff that you weren't doing as good of a job at work. And if you're traditional and you feel like family is your responsibility, you could devote more time to family then. The egalitarian women, though, were doing the best when they were good enough at home, delegating at home, and then super at work. So the super at work one kind of surprises me, but you can see this is more of like I'm going to just get by at home. And then funny, the traditional men look similar to the egalitarian women. they're best when they're super at work, delegating at home, good enough at home, which would align with those traditional gender roles. Like I'm supposed to be in the work domain, so I need to be super there. And then for the egalitarian men, it wasn't as clear cut, kind of what was the best, but the good enough at home was the worst for them. Not a totally clear pattern, but I think, you know, it can be useful if you can sort of see which bucket you fall into. Then, you know, that might be strategies to think a little bit more on if you are doing that, and maybe you could pick up on doing a little bit more of that if not. And then here's some a study that I did during COVID. So we were able to get data from 240 dual learner couples with kids under age 6 right after the pandemic hit. I mean, this was like March that we did this. I'm just tired even thinking back about during that time. So we asked people like, how are you managing? How are you getting by during this unique time? And so I'll stop talking for a second here. And this is not the actual participant, but it's a recording of what one of them said. Hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Oh.
What is you and your spouse's plan for dealing with both of your work commitments during the upcoming period when your normal childcare is disrupted? Please be as detailed as possible.
Crying, that's me. Stressing, that's me again. And then me working from home. My husband is a first responder and has to report. They offered free childcare to first responders, but they will stay with me. He's on light duty Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, due to an injury for one more week, and then we'll hopefully get back on his 24 on, 48 off shift. This will help me at home.
How will you have to adjust your work during this time?
Moving my classes online, developing alternative work for field placements, because I oversee our 510-hour practicum in our community agencies, emailing, planning, adjusting, prepping, moving meetings to a recorded format to prep summer and fall classes, and so much more.
How will your spouse have to adjust his own work?
Well, no adjustments for him. He's a first responder.
So we got open-ended comments, you know, from 240 couples, and then coded them to figure out what sort of the common strategies people were using, and did some sophisticated statistics on them. And so here's what we found. Almost a third of couples were engaging in the strategy where either the wife was doing everything. So again, we asked, like, what are you doing for childcare? You both have to still work. But so the wife was still working and doing all the childcare, or she was doing almost all of it and he would pitch in on occasion. So it's a little bit depressing that was a third of our sample that were in that boat. Then we had people who were still able to outsource. A lot of these had grandparents who helped out. And then the second category is kind of a weird one. I think it's kind of got combined because of statistical reasons, but I think it was only 4% where the husband was doing most or all the childcare, and the other people had staggering shift work. So one would work like a night schedule and one would work a day schedule. And then we had 3, what we called the egalitarian strategies. So the first one was both people were remote, but they had planned mini shifts. So like I'll work every day 8 to 12, then you do 12 to 5 kind of thing. Or they did what we call daily needs-based alternation without reducing their hours, which was every day the night before, pretty much they would look at their calendar and be like, okay, I have a big meeting 12 to 1, you're on here, and then they'd have to redo that every day. So it was interesting because there's not really any research before this pandemic to speak to that, or like which strategy is the better one. So I'll tell you in a second what we found. And then some people alternated work days, like I just work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you work Tuesday, Thursday. But these were people who were not remote. So you had to have a particular job that would allow for that. So our plan when we launched the study was like, let's follow up with people when the pandemic's over in 2 weeks. Well, we know how that went. So we did follow up with them 8 weeks later, and we measured a couple different family, health, and job performance outcomes, and looked to see which strategy was the best. And we did ask, did you actually use this strategy? You said you did. So it was only the people that did. So here's what we found. For family cohesion and relationship tension, it was worse for the wife does it all. So people aren't very happy when one person's doing everything, not too surprising. Relationship tension was the highest in the wife does it all, and that egalitarian with the planned mini shifts, actually. Interestingly, I wouldn't have predicted that one. There were no differences in sleep, and psychological distress was again worst in the wife does it all and the plan many shifts. And I should say this is the psychological distress, and all these outcomes were measured with both people. So all of these were, both the wife and husband were reporting these being worse. For job performance, it's different for the wife and husband. Not surprisingly, the wife's performing the worst when she's doing it all, but actually the husbands were worst off in the planned mini shifts. So I think the kind of big takeaway, obviously it's not great when one person's doing everything. We could have predicted that, but if two people are home working remote and trying to do childcare, it seems like the needs-based alternation is the better strategy overall. Hopefully we won't need this too much as we move forward and get out of the pandemic, but I think we still deal with it when kids are sick and things come up. So then the fifth bucket is energy. Of course, energy requires sleep. So I'm not going to talk a ton about this as I'm not a sleep researcher, but I just put some interest. I didn't realize this, but if it takes you less than 5 minutes to fall asleep, you're probably sleep deprived, they say. It's supposed to be 10 to 15 minutes. It's as if your blood alcohol level is 0.05 if you've been awake for just 16 hours. And then this will probably hit home for people. Each child in a mother's household increases her risk of insufficient sleep by 46%. So if you're thinking about having another one, keep that in mind. And then parents of newborn babies lose 6 months worth of sleep in the first 2 years. Yeah, I am feeling that, I'll tell you. People who are not sleeping well are just stressed out more easily, have more negative outcomes in terms of feeling angry, irritable, lack of motivation, that kind of thing. So it is important to prioritize your sleep. I put a link in here that has some good sleep hygiene practices that I think are really important. The biggest one being you shouldn't have any blue light, from your phone 30 to 60 minutes before bed, which I think is a hard thing for a lot of us because it's kind of like for me, unwinding time on the phone, but it's really not great for your sleep. Energy also requires recovery. So what the research on recovery shows is that there are 3 ways we can think about this. The first is sufficient recovery requires that you can detach psychologically from work. So that's, not only you're not doing work tasks, but you're not thinking about them. And this is really important to let your system really shut down because when you're still thinking about stuff, you're still stressing about that and the physiology is activated. Relaxation is a part of recovery, meaning do stuff that helps you relax. It doesn't have to be, laying down in a pool. If you relax by exercising, that can be it, or watching TV or taking a walk, all kinds of stuff. But whatever helps you relax can help mitigate work-related negative emotions. And then finally, mastery, maybe not as intuitive when we think about recovery, but that's like hobbies. So things you do that kind of feel a sense of mastery that you're getting better at that aren't work-related. Yeah. So learning the guitar, learning how to bake, that kind of stuff can help with recovery. And so we can do this on the evenings, on the weekends, on vacations. You can even, it's important to take little breaks during the day as well to ensure that you're properly recovering so that you do have energy to continue. If you don't recover, burnout is imminent. And then finally, the last thing I'll talk about in the last few minutes here, and then have some time if anybody has questions, is your outlook. I think it's really important, and I actually don't like the label season, but it's true. Like, it is important to remember that it is a season, particularly when you have young kids, right? It's a tough time. And so we're in the hardest part and also in a pandemic. It's going to change. Like I said, I'm told they're going to wipe their butts eventually. So things will get easier. And so it's just accepting that we're in this moment. And this is a image from what I was talking about before with Deloitte's mass career customization idea where people can scale on and off. I think this mimics that idea that balance is fluid. Like sometimes you can devote more to work and sometimes you do need to scale back, and that's okay. And taking a long-term perspective, I think, is helpful. Self-compassion is this sort of new notion about being kind to yourself and being non-judgmental and accepting your failures as sort of part of the human condition. And I've actually done some research on self-compassion towards work and family specifically. So we did an intervention where we sent people texts that gave them a prompt, something like, have you made any mistakes today at work or in your personal life? Yes or no. And then they would follow up, would kind of give them this thing like, you may make mistakes, experience them for what they are. Being human means being imperfect. Be patient with yourself. Things like that. There was 20, 30 different prompts they would get randomly for a week. And just to try to invoke more self-compassion. And then we measured their work-family balance before and after. It's not a huge effect. The red line is the experimental group, but you can see that they did have an increase in balance, and it was sustained for a week, kind of went back down after a month. But at least there was some short-term, I don't know if people kept practicing the self-compassion or why it went down, but some evidence that it can help. If you're kinder on yourself and less judgmental, you're probably going to feel less judgmental about your balance overall. And then similar work has been done with mindfulness. So researchers have done an intervention where they had people do a workshop on being mindful, which means just being in the present moment, non-judgmental, just not letting your thoughts wander from what you're doing currently. And they also found their outcome here was conflict, and they found a decrease from the pre to post with their groups. They didn't have a control group as a comparison, but just overall tended to decrease feelings of conflict if you were practicing more mindfulness. And then the last thing I'll talk about is Martin Seligman's approach to optimism. It's his ABCDE approach, and I think this can help sometimes when we think about specific instances where we feel like we're not doing well with work and family. So I'll walk through an example. So the adversity is the first step is when you realize you did something wrong. So I forgot it was show and tell day at school. After dropping Liam off, I had to go back home, get his rock collection, drop it off, and then I was late to my meeting. The belief is how you react to that. So initially I'm like, why can't I keep everything straight? There's too much going on. I'm just bad at everything. Then the consequence is, so what's stemming from that belief is that I just feel embarrassed about being late and I feel annoyed. The D and the E, though, are where this optimism kicks in and the reframing happens. Disputation is, okay, well, let me challenge what I'm thinking right now. So I do have a lot on my plate. Show and tell is a new thing at school. I didn't put it on my calendar, so it's kind of not surprising that I forgot it. And then the energization is like letting yourself let go of the consequence emotions and thinking how you can do better moving forward. So I'm going to let go of being annoyed. Things happen. This is not that big of a deal. It resolved fine. It wasn't a big deal that I was late, and my son was really happy to have his rock collection. True story. This kid brings rocks to school a lot. So practicing that with many different circumstances is a way to get yourself to be a more optimistic person if you're naturally not that way. So just to summarize, I think the key takeaways here are you have to first make sure you're taking care of yourself. So managing your energy and your outlook and your awareness. And I didn't talk about stress, but of course your general stress levels are important too. Remembering that balance is not static and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So the things that work for you at one point might not work for you later on, which again is kind of a challenging thing about talking about solutions here. You can achieve a better balance through thinking about some of those boundary management techniques and identifying and enabling support from both your work and non-work domains is really, really key. So with that, I will end it here. And I don't know if anybody has questions or comments, or I will open it up.
Thank you, Kristen. That was awesome. I have tons of comments and questions, but I don't want to take up all the time. Oh, just like maybe a couple. But one, I was really interested, as we're talking about like perceptions of work-life balance and conflict, and then couples with the traditional and egalitarian roles, how that all plays out with research on same-sex couples.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I had meant to mention, that I know I was taking a very heterosexual lens there. There is not a ton of research on same-sex couples. There's a little bit. that tends to suggest that they do have a more equitable division of labor.
Hmm. Oh, both with whether it's women or men.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking about as you were talking about all these like couple level responses was, this is all great, but like we also need really like organizational level like supports. But then you mentioned something about like the affinity groups, right?
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether any research suggests that people are reluctant to use that, or like fear, almost like there's this expectation that if you're anything other than a worker, in many organizations, then, by being a parent, you're bringing in something to the workplace that doesn't need to be in there. So there's stigma to join that, because then that makes you almost like less than a worker. So I wonder if they're like counterproductive. It's not helpful for these organizational level supports if people aren't going to use them. And, I know it depends obviously on the organizational culture, but I don't know, has there been any like research showing like if people aren't using them, whether it's this fear, like
yeah, like the backlash. Yeah. So not with the affinity groups particularly, but with some of the other organizational supports, there is research that suggests just what you're saying. Like if you offer this policy, but then the culture doesn't support it and people use it, it doesn't help them. It's actually more stressful because now they're just worried like, well, I'm using it, but I'm really not supposed to be. And that adds another layer of stress. So it's basically useless to just be like, we have these policies if you're not
without
actually
the culture
truly supporting them. Yeah.
Yeah, because anecdotally, I was thinking of paternal leave being slightly like more newer benefit that I know people like are reluctant to use. Like, and because I'm not, for various reasons, but yeah, so kind of.
No, I think you're absolutely right with, and it's sort of like this catch-22, because if more people used it, then it would become the norm. But because people are too scared to be the first ones to use it, then no one uses it. And it's like, can't we all just agree that it's okay to take time off if you have a baby? Can't we all just accept that? But yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely a ton that's related to the org culture, which is challenging because that's hard to change.
Can I ask something else?
Yeah.
If no one does. Okay. So years ago, my mentor, her name's Christina Nipperdang, she wrote a great book called Home and Work, Negotiating Boundaries. Do you know her?
She was your mentor? Yeah. She's big in the boundary management stuff. Yeah.
Yep. She's fantastic. And so about, this boundary work. And I remember like coding some of her interviews about like people who had, keys, separate keys.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, so that was back in the 90s where, having like these segmented realms made more sense. Has there been generally like more of an integration, like people generally integrating these two domains, or has it kind of stayed steady the past like 3 decades?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but I feel pretty haven't seen the data on this, but I feel fairly confident that people are integrating much more just because of technology. If you think about like, the 90s, you couldn't like really bring work home. You didn't have a laptop, wasn't the same. But yeah, now it's just this always on culture. And then there's a lot of research on communication technology and the impact that has on, being able to segment, and it has a huge impact because we can't shut it off a lot of the time.
Because you can't shut it off. Yeah. And then if you are someone who integrates more, do you end up working more like more hours on average a week? Because I imagine, I don't know.
Actually, I actually don't know the answer to that. I do know that people who work from home on average work longer hours,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure if like you're practicing integration. There probably is data on it. I would think so, but it's hard to even calculate your hours if you're constantly integrating, because it's like, when did you stop work?
Right. It's one long day.
Yeah.
I have lots more of interesting things that I wanted to ask you about, but I'm going to stop. This is really really cool. So you did the 2 studies, right? There was a couple study during COVID, but then you also did you were also part of a separate study that was just on workers, right? But not necessarily
Yeah.
couples.
Yeah, we did the couple study and then the remote work study.
Yeah.
On people's adjustment to remote work, and then actually did a third study on Zoom fatigue. So it was a crazy time. I had the most productive year, weirdly, because it just happened to be so much of the stuff I studied that was really at the forefront.
Yeah, I remember being very, very impressed. That's when I first saw your name. But wow, this is so impressive. Like being able to get all this up and running, like as everything was shutting down pretty much.
Yeah, I was lucky. I was part of the outsourcing group. My mom helped with the childcare, so I was able to do all that. Wouldn't have been possible without that. But,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well, Lydia, we can always talk more on the grass with those 3-year-olds running around after we pick up.
Yep, yep.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions for now, then we will stop the recording.